shop.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for joining me again here in the shop. Hey, let's get into it. Let's talk about some records and see what's in the shop. Let me grab what we're looking at here. All right. Appreciate it whenever you guys sit down and kick back and get ready to dig in again with me. And each and every time we dig into some records. Today's a good one. We're only going to talk about one record, and deservedly so, because that record is very important. The biggest selling rock and roll album of all time. I'm talking about this black record, AC/DC, Back in Black. Let's get with it. Okay, first of all, let's back up a bit. It's interesting to note that AC/DC had moved to England, I think in '76, right when punk was exploding. And this was, Back in Black, their 7th album, I think. So if you think about it, almost half of AC/DC's records were put out when they were in Australia. And they haven't even really toured outside of Australia until '76, '77. And they got to England right when punk was exploding. So I don't know, it's kind of crazy if you think about it. And that their legacy was built on those 7 albums. And then just as the momentum was going crazy and they released Highway to Hell, the lead singer, Bon Scott, dies right at the beginning of a new decade, right at the beginning of the 80s, in 1980. Sorry, he died in February 1980. But anyway, let's look a little bit of this history as to what made this what it is before we get into Back in Black. Each AC/DC album had been slowly selling more than the others. They hadn't had any huge hits outside of Australia, really. I don't even know how many big hits they really had in Australia. But everything was changing in '79. Literally and figuratively, right. But Highway to Hell was the pinnacle for AC/DC at this point. It actually went gold in the United States. In England, Touch Too Much became their first top 30 hit. Things were looking good. Actually, in England, like a year or two before that, they were only playing clubs. And on their Highway to Hell tour in England, they did 4 nights at the Hammersmith Odeon with, you may have heard of the opening act, Def Leppard. But anyway, that's how things were changing. Things were looking up for AC/DC. In fact, while they were out on the road in '79 in the United States, somehow, I'm not sure how the wires, what the connection is there, something to do with Aerosmith and Ted Nugent. Maybe they were touring with him. But anyway, they got hooked up with their management, with Aerosmith's management. And AC/DC at the time, you have to remember, this album would have been Highway to Hell, their first gold album in the United States, slowly getting more and more, airplay, not much, but some, getting some kind of hits, just more exposure out on the road. But they were only earning like up to $1,500, $3,000 a show in the summer of '79. But they met up with this management guys, or got involved with these management guys from Aerosmith, and by the end of the summer of '79, they went from $1,500 to $3,000 a show to $25,000 to $50,000 a show. That's a big leap. That tells you how things were going. And it's also weird to note that even though Highway to Hell was wildly popular, so to speak, a few years back some letters came up that Bon Scott had written to his sister while he was out on the road on the Highway to Hell tour. And he was even complaining about money. Like their wages, they were still getting a weekly wage while they're out on the road. Only a couple $100 or whatever. He was complaining to his sister that he was in debt on payday, that he had to pay back the band like, I don't know, $130 or something like that. It really puts it in perspective, because you got to think about, even though people know who you are and you're traveling the world, you got songs on the radio, you're on stage, that doesn't mean you're rich. Anyway, Angus and Malcolm had said that Bon was a real driving force in AC/DC. No matter how much he was out partying or what he was doing, he could drink all night and he would still be the first one up in the morning, waking the guys up, the kids, so to speak, saying, "Come on, guys, we got to go rock and roll. Let's get busy. Let's get the business done. Let's get the job done." So My point being, Bon was a vital part, and he drove AC/DC, AC/DC, AC/DC. Basically, we all know Malcolm and Angus write the music. Bon was doing the words. He was the front man. So anyway, AC/DC is riding high at the end of '79. Things are looking up, looking really good. The tour finishes January 27th, 1980, in Southampton, England. They have a little bit of time off. Bon, Angus, and Malcolm had already started to work on what would be this, because as we all know, Bon thought he was just going to be part of this. But anyway, they finished the show, finished the tour at the end of January. A few weeks later, Angus, it was actually in February 11th, 1980, Angus quietly gets married with his sweetheart. Not a big fancy wedding like at the local registry's office. And then the band is back, you know, ready to write and rehearse. Less than a week later after Angus got married, or right around a week after that, in February, Bon Scott ended up dead. What happened? Well, like Malcolm says, the more the years go on, the taller the tales get. But basically, the long and short of it is, while the band were taking a break, Bon decided to go out. Well, Malcolm said he had got slighted by one of his buddies, or a girl, I'm not sure which, but he was taking it a bit hard. He called one of his buddies and said, let's go out drinking. And they were going to go to, it was on a Monday night, and they were going to go to the Music Machine in Camden. Yes, this is before the good mixer, before Britpop times and whatnot. But anyway, Malcolm and his buddy went out to go, Bon and his buddy went out to go drinking. He was carrying some heavy weight around for whatever the jilt was. So he was boozing. Even his friends said they drank insane amounts of whiskey that night. Well, to make a long story short, by the time they got done partying and got home, Bon was out. He couldn't be pulled out of the car, couldn't be moved. Well, was he that heavy? Was he that big? I don't know. Maybe his buddy was just super drunk as well. And anyway, he couldn't move him, so he left him in the car. He called his ex, I believe it was his ex-girlfriend, and said, hey, what do I do? Can't get Bon out of the car. She said, I'll just cover him up, put the seat down, you know, blah, blah, blah. So his friend did just that. He went back to his apartment, crashed out. Next morning, woke up. He was too lazy, split-in headache, hangover, as you know, and sent a friend, called another friend near where the car was parked and said, hey, dude, can you go check on Bon just to make sure he made it home okay? Blah, blah, blah. So he sends the middleman, so to speak, to go check on Bon, and the guy walks over to the car, kind of does a quick glance. He doesn't know that Bon had the seat laid down, and he's laying there with a blanket pillow, so he just sees there's no one in the car at a quick glance, says, yeah. Tells his buddy, no, man, Bon went home. Bon didn't go home. Bon was dead in the car, but no one knew that. Later that afternoon, his buddy gets up, it's time to run errands, goes out to his car, opens the car, guess what? There you have it. Dead Bon Scott, singer AC/DC, in your car, Tuesday morning. Horrible. What do we do? Funny thing is, there was no vomit. It wasn't like a Hendrix death. There's no great, conspiracy about it. The coroner said, actually, that Bon literally died of alcohol poisoning. He drank that much that he died. So anyway, there was no depression. It's not like he wasn't looking forward to things. All that stuff's out the window. He just partied too hard that night. Anyway, the band, what are we going to do? We all know the story, or somewhat, right? Bon's father, at his funeral, had told the Malcolm brothers, told the Young brothers, or Malcolm, you guys got to keep going. So that's what they did. They went back to England, and they're determined to make a great comeback album. I got to mention somewhere, out on the road with Highway to Hell or whatever, Malcolm had been working, as you do on the road, on a couple riffs. And one of the riffs that he had on tape. And he just couldn't figure it out. He was like, man, what is this? What is this? And he had gone to Angus one night with his little cassette recorder, and he said, hey, dude, I got this riff I've been working on, and I just can't seem to figure it out. Should I just tape over it and we just start anew, or what do you think? I'm going to give it one more shot. He played it back to Angus, and there it was. the riff to Back in Black. That song was rescued from the road, almost erased. Now they had a track to work with, and they had a title of an album, and they had a design in mind. This was going to be an homage to their singer who had just died. We're going to call it Back in Black, and it's going to be a solid black album cover. They had an idea, maybe one or two tracks floating around out there somewhere, but they had to get to work. But the big problem was they didn't have a singer. What are they going to do? So they have to audition for singers. Interesting to note, some of the guys they auditioned, or rumored to be auditioning, you know how these rock and roll tales can be. Steve Marriott. Can you believe it? Steve Marriott from Humble Pie and the Small Faces. Can you imagine him singing with AC/DC? I don't think so. I don't know if you ever heard of this band, Heavy Metal Kids, but they also auditioned the singer from Heavy Metal Kids, Gary Holton. You should check them out. That's a good band. And they also had Jimmy Barnes step up to the mic. He's another fellow Aussie. And I think Jimmy Barnes actually sang for INXS after Michael Hutchence died. So maybe Jimmy Barnes is the Australian de facto. Call that dude if you need a stand-in vocalist. I don't know. I don't really like Jimmy Barnes. But anyway, they had heard Bon mention this one dude. And this one dude is Brian Johnson. Now, Brian Johnson, in a nutshell, had tried to be a rock and roller before, had his shot at fame in a band called Geordie. They had a great single, great hit called All Because of You. But rock and roll is fickle, fame is fickle. They never quite hit it. He had had his share. Brian quietly retreated to his auto repair shop. He had been recently separated from his wife, had a couple kids. Here he is repairing windshields, fixing cars and whatever. Started another little band to play in pubs on the weekend. And he's making enough money to get by. Anyway, Bon had mentioned him a while back because sometimes in the 70s, Bon had seen him perform. And he had told the young brothers, like, man, I saw this crazy dude. He's out yelling and screaming and rolling all around. And talk about energy. This guy had it all. So it really made an impression on Bon. But the funny thing is, Bon didn't realize it, but the night he had actually seen Brian Johnson, Brian had appendicitis. His appendix had burst. And a lot of that energy and rolling around and screaming had nothing to do with showmanship, but everything to do with pain, because as soon as they got off stage that night, he had to go to the hospital. But anyway, one thing led to another, and they were able to track Brian down. Anyway, they have one of their secretaries, AC/DC does, call him up and say, hey, you want to be in this band? And Brian's like, I don't know about that. I don't know about that. And he goes, who is it? Who is it? Who is it? The girl wouldn't say so. On Brian's, well, Brian was pretty quick. He said, okay, don't tell me the name then. Just give me the first letter of each name of the band then. So the girl said, okay, A, C, D, C. Cat's out of the bag. Boom. Brian knew who it was. Okay, that sounded tasty. Maybe I'll do this. Anyway, make a long story short, I don't remember where Brian was, down on the coast with his auto repair shop. It was really the impetus to go and audition for AC/DC was twofold. One, because, and the main reason to get him back to London was because he was going to earn £350, about $400, a little over $400, to go do a commercial, a voiceover for a vacuum cleaner commercial. And he figured, man, if I can go make a quick buck there doing that, gets a couple $100, then maybe I can pop on over for the rock and roll audition, have a laugh. Maybe I'll get a job out of it. Well, guess what? He did. He went to London, did the audition for the vacuum cleaner, the Hoover commercial, got his pay, went to go do the audition for AC/DC, and there was a cafe across the street from the studios where they were holding auditions, and he was a little nervous, so he thought, I better stop here and let me get a bite to eat so I can get some fuel and steady my nerves and whatever. Well, he ordered whatever, steak and kidney pie, I don't know what it was, but he complained and he said, like, the crust was too hard to eat. So it even made him more frustrated because he's nervous. He's a little bit, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? I can't even eat my lunch, you know, whatever. But he said it was cold and raining, and he just said, whatever, it's now or never. I got to go across the street, get this done. So he goes across the street, walks in, and supposedly Malcolm comes up, smoking like always. Hey, dude, how's it going? Here. Gives him a Newcastle Brown and said, you could probably use this. Brian hits it. Damn right I can use that. Steadies his nerves a bit. Anyway, they get into it. What are we going to do? Whatever, whatever. Well, it turns out Brian Johnson and his little weekend pub band actually did a cover of Whole Lotta Rosie. So they did a cover of Whole Lotta Rosie and ended up doing Ike and Tina Turner's Nutbush City Limits. Obviously, Malcolm and Angus knew this dude. It's kind of funny, actually. Malcolm said that he saw that Brian had a big chest, so he thought, man, this guy's good. You know, he can sing, he's good at lyrics, whatever, but he's got a big chest. He's got the tools to do the job. So they kind of knew that Brian was going to get the job, but Brian didn't know that. They also tried to throw a couple quick ones in themselves, like make up some lyrics on the spot. And at one time, you know, Brian had kind of come up with giving the dog a bone. And they thought that was pretty funny, you know, look sideways, look, nudge, nudge, har, har kind of thing. Funny thing is, Bon Scott, you know, everybody knew AC/DC for the kind of songs, you know, those kind of dirty songs, rock and roll, raunchy songs, raunch and roll. But Bon Scott never considered himself a lyricist. He considered himself he called it toilet poetry. So when Brian Johnson was able to throw some quick lyrics together for Giving a Dog a Bone, obviously the young brothers were like Beavis and Butthead laughing about it like he's got what it takes. Anyway, they kept him, you know, keep him guessing, send him home. Don't get in touch, we'll get in touch with you kind of thing. Anyway, just so happened a few weeks later or so, it was Brian Johnson's dad's birthday. He'd gone out to buy his dad a bottle of whiskey, whatever. He's sitting at home waiting for the evening to go party with his dad. The phone rings, picks it up, and it's Malcolm Young. And he says, hey, dude, it's me. You want to join the band? Brian didn't believe it. He said, hey, man, call me back in 10 minutes. This is a prank call. I don't believe it. If you call me back in 10 minutes and tell me the news, I'll believe it. Hung up the phone, sat there. Exactly 10 minutes later, the phone rang again. Malcolm said, dude, you want to be in the band? You're in. You're in. Done deal. Brian immediately opens up his father's birthday present, hits some of that whiskey. It's on. I'm a member of AC/DC. He was officially announced as the new lead singer on April 1st, 1980. And the ball is rolling fast. Not even long after. Let's keep in mind, it hadn't even been really 6 weeks since Bon Scott had died. And remember, it barely 8 weeks or 2 months since Angus got married. And only 3 or 4 months after the end of the tour, when they ended at the end of January. So everything is happening fast here at the beginning of 1980. Anyway, he's joined the band. There's some intrepidation. What's going on? Who's this new singer? What's he going to be about? You know, all of a sudden the producer, John Lang, or Mutt Lang, gives AC/DC a call. He had just produced Highway to Hell. More about him later. But he gives the band a call and says, hey, someone just dropped out of studio time down in the Bahamas at Compass Point. If we want to get in there, we got to go like now. So that's quite an amazing thing. I can't stress it enough. That in less than 6 months, you finish the tour, you have a gold album, your first top 30 hit, your singer dies, your guitarist gets married, you get a new singer, and now this new singer, this new kid on the block, you're all on a plane going down to the sunny Bahamas. Now, word of warning. There had just been a hurricane coming through there in the Bahamas. Dodgy weather, crime, drug trafficking, loose women. It wasn't an ideal scene. So the band was kind of warned about that. When you get down here, stick close to the studios. Don't go out and get nutty, whatever. Just stay here. And supposedly the studios were really barren. But there was a great sound there at Compass Point Studios. In fact, you should check out some of the other people who recorded there. Talking Heads, Tom Tom Club, Grace Jones. There's a great compilation out called Funky Nassau, the Compass Point story. Check that out. It's completely different than AC/DC, but the people who recorded there and worked there, it's pretty funky time. Robert Palmer, actually, was always in the studio, almost like a studio hand. I don't think he had anything to do with AC/DC, though. Anyway, the band's in the Bahamas, got to get this done. Storm had just happened, hurricane gone through. They're told the power's going to keep going out, whatever. Brian Johnson, remember, he had big shoes to fill. He was nervous about all this. New kid on the block, never sang live with the band, only in the studio. What are we going to do? Mutt Lange was very particular, and he was having a talk. He liked to keep Brian out of the other sessions and keep Brian focused. Well, he did that with all the guys, actually. He was, when you talk to Malcolm and Angus, they've told people before that Mutt was very instrumental in getting AC/DC focused and building their sound. So it was no different with this new kid, Brian Johnson. So anyway, he was talking to Brian one night, and he goes, tonight we're going to be working on, what was it, on Hell's Bells. We're going to be working on Hell's Bells, and I want you to focus, blah, blah, blah. And while they're talking, they heard some thunder. And Brian and Mutt Lange was like, wow, did you hear that? And Brian said, yeah, man, that's the kind of thunder at home we call rolling thunder. Well, Mutt said, you know what, kid, you might be onto something. Write that down. Those could be good lyrics. So Brian just knocked it off. And if you go back and listen to the opening lines about Hell's Bells, that's how it happened. Sitting in his room, talking to Mutt, heard thunder, boom, there you have it, opening lines. The album seemed to be going like that. They had Back in Black. I forgot to mention, before Bon died, when they were rehearsing new songs, I think they had, what was it? Dang, I don't even remember what it was. Hold on one second. Oh, when the band was rehearsing with Bon was sitting in on drums, interesting enough. They had actually worked out Have a Drink on Me and Let Me Put My Love Into You. So now we're talking, we're in the Bahamas. We got a couple of those songs. We have Back in Black, whatever. Anyway, the band gets it done. 9 songs out of 10, they're done. We need one more song. Last song they do for the album was Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. And just so you know, Brian was in the studio having a smoke when, again, Mutt said, hey, dude, I'm going to start this tape. Mics are live. Just make up something. Start talking. We got to work on this intro. So Brian just started, hey, all you middlemen, blah, 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 blah. One take, boom. You're opening there, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution. Committed to record, doom. There you have it. I think Malcolm went back to New York with Mutt to do a few guitar overdubs, whatever. But basically, the album was in the can. And when they got it back to England, the band had to listen through. They were just blown away. This is amazing, they thought. We're on to something here. Again, I cannot stress this enough. This was crazy. Barely 6 months since Bon Scott died, and since AC/DC finished the Highway to Hell tour, Back in Black is released. And they're ready to hit the road again, if you can believe it. This was released July 21st, 1980. Funny thing is, this is the second biggest album in all of popular music history. Second biggest selling album ever. Ever. You hear me? Bigger than the Beatles, bigger than Stones, bigger than Pink Floyd, bigger than the Eagles, you name it, These guys are bigger. Second only to Michael Jackson's Thriller. Imagine that. However, this is the biggest selling, number one selling rock and roll / heavy metal album of all time. And funnily enough, sold more copies in America than anywhere else. 30 million copies, somewhere around there. But the funny thing is, it also has a reputation as being the biggest selling rock album ever that never got to number one. Never got to number one in America. It only got to number 4. But because it was so popular after it was released, a year later in 1980, Atlantic Records decided to release a previous AC/DC album that hadn't been released in America yet, and that was Dirty Deeds. Dirty Deeds actually got to number 3, outplaced this, but of course didn't sell near as many. Now, let's talk a bit about this, the biggest selling album, biggest selling rock album of all time. It's amazing. In 6 months, I just can't say it enough. Your lead singer dies, you come off the road, let's rephrase that. You come off the road with your first gold album, your lead singer dies, you manage to find a new lead singer, in the face of it all, carry on, push on, go to the Bahamas, avoid crime, avoid storm, whatever, end up recording what would be your biggest album that changed your whole career, changed music history, and release it and hit the road again 6 months later. Such is the life such is the rock and roll life out on the road, right? Okay, few points about this. Funny thing is, the guys knew what they wanted the album to be like, an ode to Bon Scott. They wanted an all-black cover. They actually had to send the cover back 6 times to the record company to get them to understand, no, we don't want this. Supposedly the record company sent back a pink cover at one time. Can you imagine? But anyway, AC/DC finally got it. They said, no, this is an ode to Bon Scott. We want it all black, embossed. We don't want any color on it, whatever. After battling 6 times back and forth, the band settled on a little gray outline, just barely on their logo so you could see it. So there we have that. They knew what it was about when they came out. Well, what they were going for. It had to be special. It had to be a nod to their previous singer, Bon, and who knew what would happen after that. But now we all know. Huge, huge. 4 singles came off of this album. Well, let me just say before we talk about that, Rolling Stone said this was the first album since Led Zeppelin II, which just captured all the blood, sweat, and the glory of what this type of music should be about. Rolling Stone also said, funnily enough, at the time, this was the leanest, meanest album of all time. I don't know. They could be onto something there. But let's talk a little bit about the songs. There was 4 singles that came off of this. Well, first of all, come on. It's an undeniable classic. Changed the way, well, changed hard rock forever. Slash even said this was the album that saved rock and roll. And some other people have said it's one of the key albums that changed the face of metal music in 1980. Some people say 1980 was the year that metal was brought back to life. But let's take a look at this. AC/DC, 10 songs. 10 songs. And one critic pointed out, there's no swords mentioned, no elves, no Middle Earth, no fantasy, just booze, chicks, and a little bit of, could be dark insinuations. But listen to these titles. Back in Black, Hell's Bells, Shoot the Thrill, Giving the Dog a Bone, What Do You Do for Money, Honey, Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, Let Me Put My Love Into You. A little bit of notoriety about that. Let Me Put My Love Into You. I think that Bon had started to write that with Angus and them after they just come off the road with Highway to Hell. Remember Tipper Gore? You know who she is? You know who Al Gore is? That dude who keeps telling us the world's going to end. Inconvenient Truth. Inconvenient Truth here. Tipper was in charge of that parents censorship group, whatever they were called, parental control, when you had to start putting stickers on the albums. This song, Let Me Put My Love Into You, made it on her filthy 15, so you know she had it out for AC/DC. Just could not stand that they would sing such a dirty song like that or insinuate something like that. But just remember, they tried to control your music way back then, the Gores, and now they're trying to control how you live. Whatever. Just approach with caution about Al Gore and his wife, right? They don't know what they're talking about. Anyway, You Shook Me All Night Long, Shake a Leg and Have a Drink on Me. Undeniable classic. Like I keep saying, biggest selling rock album in the world, second biggest selling album of all time. Real quick, 4 singles. All 4 singles, remember MTV had just come out in early 80s. But in England, they were a little bit further ahead of America and stuff, and they would film promo videos before MTV came about. But they had gone to Holland and filmed 4 videos for all 4 singles in one day. That's why when you see the videos, they all look the same, because they were all filmed in the same place at the same time. The 4 singles that came off of this. Of course, we all know Back in Black, but we'll get to that in a minute. You Shook Me All Night Long. That was the first single the world had ever heard with AC/DC's brand new singer, Brian Johnson. It got up to number 38 in England, number 35 in the U.S. And it was also their first top 40 hit in the United States. So off to a good start with that, kids. Believe it or not, You Shook Me All Night Long. Number 1 song played in the United States strip clubs. Is that a badge of honor or what? I don't know. You tell me. Also on the category of classic rock radio, supposedly, it is the 4th most played song ever. Only outgunned by 2 songs by Aerosmith and 1 by Jimi Hendrix. There you have it. You Shook Me All Night Long. Of course, Back in Black, that got up to number 37 in the U.S. Kind of fell a little bit there, but went up in the U.K. Amazing thing. This whole album is about space in between notes. And that's what Mutt Lange was good about. And of course, Compass Point helps with that because that studio has a very unique sound. what's amazing about that song, it's gone down in the annals of rock history as one of the greatest riffs ever. 3 chords, guys, 3 chords. E, 3 times D, 3 times A. A lot of space in between. Boom, right in your face. You'll never forget it. In fact, everybody derides AC/DC for only playing 3 chords. But like Angus said, we go for the throat. You get 3 chords. If you get 4th, it's a bonus. Prime example right there, kids. E, D, and A. Go play yourself one of the most famous songs, well-known songs in rock and roll history. Actually, Metal Hammer magazine was making a comment about that track, Back in Black. They said there are rock songs that appeal to metal fans, and there are metal songs that appeal to rock fans. Then there is Back in Black, a rock and metal song that appeals to everybody, from dads to dudes and to old ladies beating snotty little kids over the head. This is a no-holds-barred, no-nonsense, 3-chord monster of a riff. Totally true. And Rolling Stone, once again, they praise this album a lot. Rolling Stone said Angus and Malcolm's dual guitar masterpiece is the platonic idea of hard rock. Then we had Hell's Bells, which, whatever, starts the album off. I don't quite dig that song, but that was the 3rd single. And then we have Rock and Roll Ain't Noise Pollution, which got up to number 15 in the UK charts. Did not place very well. I don't think placed at all in the US charts. Of course, as you can imagine, being one of the biggest selling albums of all times, it is in the Rolling Stones 500 greatest albums of all time. Time magazine even named it as one of the 100 greatest albums of all times. Guys, that's about it. I don't know if there's anything else to throw on there about this album, except that it is a rock and roll classic, and this is a great copy. Look how it's kind of beat up, very well worn. I'm sure there was some serious partying done with this, but I hate to say it, I'm a Highway to Hell guy. I prefer Bon Scott. I prefer that album, but these two together, Highway to Hell and this, oh my gosh, you could not have had Back in Black without Highway to Hell, and this changed everything for rock and roll, for AC/DC, and it's amazing to think Brian Johnson has now been with AC/DC way longer than Bon Scott ever was, and that people think there was no other singer before this album. It's amazing. Guys, thanks for spending some time here with me again today talking about AC/DC. Great band, solid album. It's in the shop, guys. Thanks again for joining me. As always, you can get in touch with me, noisyrecordsmx@hotmail.com. You can leave a message if you're watching on Instagram, or if you're watching on YouTube, you can do the same. Put a message down there. If you're interested in these, I hate to be like everybody else, but man, subscribe so you're aware when I put a new video up. I'm trying to get better about this, and I know I have some silly looking hair going on today, but hey, we made it through. It's no big deal. We carry on, huh? Thanks again for joining me. Everybody take care. Stay cool. It's hot out there. And most of all, keep on rocking. Thanks, guys.